Hello, welcome to Converging Dialogues. This is Xavier Bonilla. On this episode, I am talking with my good friend, David Hoinski. David's been on the podcast before, a long time ago in the early days, and we've become very good friends, and we've kept in touch, and we've been kind of itching to get on here again and talk more philosophy. So for those of you that want to listen to that previous episode, it is episode 26, entitled Getting Personal with Nietzsche and Heidegger. We talked for about 2 hours there about Nietzsche and Heidegger and kind of philosophy in general. I wanted to talk to David again about a bunch of things we didn't talk about in that conversation, stuff that we've talked about kind of offline, and just kind of, get a conversation recorded. So we recorded this maybe about a month or two ago, and we talk about many other aspects of philosophy, things he thinks about, things I think about, and that way it's it really is a conversation, between two friends, which is great. I think those are really, really nice. Listening back to it, it was a very nice conversation, kind of thinking out loud, spitballing. It was really, really nice. Just for listeners, as a reminder, David is a philosopher and writer. He's also an assistant professor of philosophy at West Virginia University. He emphasizes ancient philosophy, modern Greek philosophy, and also ethical political philosophy. He also is fluent in many languages as well, which obviously helps him with his teaching. And in this conversation, we talk about the pre-socratics. Both of us have an interest in the pre-socratics. We talk about the logos. We talk about the nature and role of philosophy in general. We talk about immanence versus transcendence. We talk about reality versus metaphysical, guilt and shame, and we have a bit of a conversation about kind of emotions. We spend a good amount of time on Nietzsche's concept of the death of God and how layered that is, and how we have ideas and about what it means, and we think about what other people have said, but how it's a really deep concept. We talk about the universal and political implications of Nietzsche's philosophy. We talk a little bit about capitalism, and we spend the last third of the conversation talking about why appreciation is important, which is this is David's idea, and we talked about this one day, and I started thinking about it, and so we kind of are very much thinking out loud. And what does it mean to appreciate something versus valuing something versus liking something? Why should we do that? It's really, really, really engaging, really, really fascinating, something I hadn't really thought about. And of course, David's a fantastic thinker. He's a wonderful thinker. So of course he's thinking about these things, and he pushes me, and hopefully I push him a little bit and say, well, what about this? Or what about here? And so that part of the conversation feels really fruitful and really rewarding, at least it was for me. And so hopefully as the listener, you'll be able to hear that and also be able to do some thinking about it as well. And so again, as a reminder, you can listen to this episode and all other episodes anywhere you find your podcast, but feel free to subscribe to my free Substack, where you can get all these episodes in one place and more interactive at convergingdialogues.substack.com. And now I bring you David Hoinski. I'm here with David Hoinski. David, it's nice to see you.
Xavier, it's nice to see you.
Yeah. So we have been talking again for some time. You came on early goings when I started doing the podcast, and so folks can listen to our wonderful conversation that we had. I guess it was 2020. That sounds right. Yeah, I think it was. That sounds right. Yeah, we talked about a whole variety of things, and so now we're going to talk about a whole other set of things. Yeah, so I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks.
Yeah, I really like our conversations. They feel exploratory, and they feel very helpful in a conversational manner to try and work things out and all these big ideas. And so obviously we have so many mutual interests. So I'm just curious to see where it goes. Just briefly, just remind folks, just the thumbnail version of you. Just tell people who you are, what your background's in, and what you currently study and teach.
Yes. So I'm a PhD in philosophy, and I got my PhD at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh. Wrote with a dissertation on the philosophical uses of autobiography. So I'm very interested in philosophical autobiography as a literary genre. And I teach at West Virginia University, so I'm a teaching assistant, what's called a teaching assistant professor. So I teach a lot, and I teach a little bit of everything. You know, I do courses on Spinoza. So I do, I do these courses where I just focus on one particular philosopher.
Mm-hmm.
We'll spend a semester reading Spinoza's Ethics, or as you know, I spent a semester reading Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra.
Mm-hmm.
And students tend to like those courses.
Mm-hmm.
And I do the ancient philosophy course, and I guess probably the majority of my publications are on Plato and Aristotle.
Mm-hmm.
But then I also do work on mostly German philosophy, sort of Kant, Hegel,
mm-hmm.
Nietzsche, Heidegger, and then some other 20th century figures. You and I share a love of Gadamer.
Oh yeah, I love Gadamer. He's underrated, and I think I think he'll get his day in the sun. His whole hermeneutical philosophy is it's an intersection of my worlds, past and present. So I really like him.
It's great, and I've yet to teach Gadamer, so I think that would be
mm-hmm.
That would be fun.
Mm-hmm.
And lately I've been working a lot on Freud, and I'm trying to develop a course that's going to be just an upper level Freud course
mm-hmm.
Next year. So students are already getting excited about that one.
Yeah. We maybe at some point in the conversation, Freud will come up. So consciously or unconsciously,
he's always there.
He's always there. So that's great. Yeah, that's it's always nice to see people, very actively. And teaching in the academy and teaching really, really good thinkers in their work. I feel like I also really enjoy teaching. I don't do it full time, but I really enjoy it. And, we need good people to do quality education. And that's definitely lacking in many places, although there's some really good folks that absolutely do it. So I want a whole bunch of themes I want to get into. So let's, something that I've talked about a little bit here, but something that doesn't get talked about a lot is the pre-socratics. So everyone talks about Socrates, Aristotle, Plato. These are the guys, the kind of big heavy hitters that people kind of really get into. Obviously you have the Stoics as well. But the pre-socratics, I think, were super important. I guess you can set this up or I can set it up, but I guess there was this emphasis on the metaphysical as opposed to later philosophy, which is more on the human being and more on the person and freedom and authenticity and things like that as you get into 20th century philosophy. Although there is a kind of a renaissance of that of sorts. Nietzsche talked a lot about Heraclitus, and Heidegger did too. So some people were really interested in the pre-socratics as well. So
the pre-socratics, they become big, especially in the 19th century.
Yeah,
with Hegel and some others.
Yeah, tell us how do you understand, who are these group of guys and women? Isn't there a few women? There's who's that main female philosopher? I don't know if she's in this time frame. It will come to me. Anyways, tell us the big movers and shakers in the pre-socratics and what they were up to and how they all kind of get lumped in this category, before Socrates.
Yeah, it's how do they get lumped into this category?
Mm-hmm.
Nietzsche talked about the pre-Platonic philosophers. So Nietzsche put Socrates with the so-called pre-Socratics and viewed Plato really as the major turning point in the history of philosophy. So that was one of Nietzsche's novelties. It starts, the famous year is 585. When Thales of Miletus was supposed to have predicted a solar eclipse. So 585, so early 6th century. And Miletus was a Greek colony sort of like on the coast of Asia Minor, so I guess it's modern day Turkey. And I don't know. I mean, that's sort of where I guess that is considered the cradle of, Western philosophy.
Yeah.
So that's where we get Thales and Anaximander, who seems to have studied with Thales, and then Anaximenes. Those three are coming from there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this. I mean, Xavier, there's this great mystery, which is why.
Mm-hmm.
Why did these guys start philosophizing?
Mm.
And one possible answer is that there was a lot of different cultures sort of coming together in that area. So there were influences coming from Egypt and Babylon and so on and so forth. There was a lot of diversity. And so one idea is that, these guys started thinking, everyone has these different myths, these different stories about how the world came to be and why things are the way that they are. And everyone has these different stories and they can't all be true. So we need to look for some deeper truth that subtends this diversity. And so the idea is that, the standard way of understanding the pre-socratics, and there's a lot to it, is that they start to look for naturalistic explanations as opposed to mythological ones, or the kind of thing we find in Hesiod, the theogony, a story of the coming to be of the gods, and so on and so forth.
The emphasis, though, is less about the human being and more on the universe, right? So how do we understand, the planets and planetary systems? How do we understand the stars in the sky? How do we understand nature? How do we understand how do we basically build a natural science or natural laws? Or how do we understand how these things govern, how things move and operate? It's still very much, that's the focus for these guys, less so about, necessarily ethics or human beings or authenticity, autonomy, freedom. It's not that. It's more of, there's no, morals per se. It's more of just how are things working in the universe. It's in that way a kind of physical aspect.
I mean, particularly with the Milesians, or also known as the Ionian philosophers, the emphasis tends to be on cosmology. But later, with some other pre-Socratics, we do start to get ethical reflection, for example, and reflection on the nature of the soul. So, for example, in Heraclitus, we find these kinds of considerations, character and the soul, and what it is to live rightly. One of the most famous characterizations, or ways of making the distinction between Socrates and the pre-Socratics, comes from Cicero. And Cicero talks about how Socrates, he brought philosophy down from the heavens and into cities and homes. So away from the sort of grand cosmological speculations and
is that
into the realm of human affairs.
Yeah, is that a purposeful kind of shift where it's like, look, we're gonna think about the physical nature of things, or we're going to think about, the universe, but then we can spend all this time talking about the cosmos and where it comes from and all these things, but also where's our part to play in it? And so Socrates is the one, well, maybe Plato as well, but that is kind of bringing it down literally from, this very kind of cerebral, abstract kind of thing into like a very human one-to-one thing of like, well, here's how this impacts us as humans.
Yeah, and he starts worrying about things like, how to understand the virtues, or the human excellences, courage and justice and so on and so forth. So Aristotle in his metaphysics says Socrates is looking for definitions of these sort of central human qualities, or so, but, I don't think it's such a nice, clean break. I think that there's an extent to which Socrates is interested in nature. There's certainly, Plato certainly presents Socrates as having some interest in nature. So it's kind of funny because in the apology of, in Socrates' apology, Plato's version, Socrates says, in his defense speech that he doesn't know anything about the things in the heavens and under the earth. That was a way of talking about it. Things in the heavens and under the earth, these kinds of cosmological concerns. But then in the Phaedo, which depicts, the day of Socrates' death and when he drinks the hemlock and all of that, one of the last things he does is sort of to engage in this cosmological, geological speculation. So clearly, Plato at least wants to present him as having some interest in these bigger picture questions.
Where do you think, for a while, we see the pre-Socratics as being less relevant or less talked about for a long time in philosophy and in human thought?
Yes.
Obviously, there are some people that do bring them up again, right? As you mentioned. But why do you think that their thought is not talked about for a long time, at least in a philosophical sense?
Yeah, it's a good question. One thing to say is that we don't have most of the texts that we have from the pre-Socratics are fragmentary. So we don't have. Yeah.
Heraclitus has 75, 100 fragments.
Yeah.
Something like that.
In most cases, we don't have whole texts. We have like a big swath of the beginning of Parmenides' text. Because I forget who someone reproduced it, Simplicius or someone. So, but for the most part, we have lots of fragments. And so that makes the study of the pre-Socratics, that makes it difficult. You've got to sort of do a lot of work to piece together what they were really driving at. Since we have the fragments, but we've sort of lost the context or the whole. So I think that's one reason that it can be difficult even today, with all the scholarly aids that we have. Even today, it can be difficult to approach the pre-Socratic.
It's interesting. Heidegger was recently published in English. Heidegger did a series of lectures on Heraclitus.
Yes.
Yeah, I have it here. It's
oh, nice. That's a beautiful looking book.
Yeah, this really pushed me when I read this, and it came out a couple of years ago. Yeah, 2019.
Who published that?
This was Bloomsbury, oddly enough.
Bloomsbury, and that's not the lecture course he did with Eugen Fink. Or it is.
I don't know. These were done in 43
seminar.
Yeah, the seminars. Yeah, 43, 44, and 43 and 44.
Yeah, Heidegger, as you know, was super interested in the pre-Socratics and not just Heraclitus, right? Parmenides,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But it's interesting, though, in terms of how people are taking, we're talking about fragments, but people are taking these fragments and really kind of, if you will, I don't want to say riffing off of it, but they're trying their best to do some exposition on what it is that they were trying to say. So, for example, with Heraclitus, philosophy, it's about the unity of opposites. You have the different elements. You have flux, flow, becoming. Mm-hmm. There are all these things. What is it? You can't step into the same river twice or whatever it is.
Right.
All of these different ideas that are very, I don't know, it's written in a way that's very odd. It's not complicated to get, but it's like, well, what are they really saying here? They're talking about nature and they're talking about these things. And then you have people that will come after them and say, well, here's what they were talking about. They were setting this whole, based on these fragments, we can see that they were trying to understand some of these ideas about cosmology and about the natural world.
About the nature of reality.
Right. So, what do you make of that in terms of, I think you mentioned Hegel looks at some of these guys, Heidegger does, Nietzsche does. What do you make of people doing this kind of commentary, centuries later on these thinkers?
Well, Parmenides always sort of remains central to the tradition because Parmenides features prominently in Plato. I mean, Plato has a dialogue named after Parmenides, which Parmenides appears, and some of these others as well. I mean, Heraclitus is there in Plato, and in a way, it seems Plato sort of accepted Heraclitus's view of flux, as at least with respect to the world of sense perception. The world of our everyday experience is in flux for Plato, and it's for that reason that it's not really a proper object of knowledge, because it's always changing. Plato thinks proper objects of knowledge should be stable somehow.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to see, when people talk about Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, it's really nice, kind of, as you were saying, there's not really a start end. There's a kind of merging, if you will, as is true of many periods that overlap. And so in terms of thinking, and it's interesting to see some of the influence that the pre-socratics or the pre-platonics had on these major figures people are still, talking about Aristotle, and as they should. I mean, Aristotle is, a powerhouse, but it is one of those things where it's like, yeah, what was influencing their thinking? And you can see some of these earlier guys that were influential on some of their thinking. So it's a kind of nice hyperlink, I guess, that goes along with philosophy in that way.
And we keep coming back to them, and especially since the 19th. So again, I think, Parmenides is someone who features in Renaissance Platonism. I think that in the Platonic tradition, the pre-Socratics are never completely absent, but they really become a big deal in the 19th century. And I think, Hegel's lectures on the history of philosophy are super important for this. And, Hegel's very much in conversation with the pre-Socratics. I mean, even when we read his logic, I'm teaching the encyclopedia logic right now. He's making constant reference to Anaxagoras, Parmenides, Heraclitus, so on and so forth. The first three moments of the logic are being, nothing, and becoming. Being is the truth recognized by Parmenides. Nothing is the truth recognized by Buddhism. This world is really nothing. You might think of Schopenhauer and the
nihilist.
And then becoming, of course, is the truth recognized by Heraclitus. But Hegel puts them all together, so they're
well, Hegel was very good at building systems. So, is there anything else that you want to say specifically about their specific philosophy or their ideas from either Heraclitus or Parmenides? Or
I don't know. You're a big fan of Heraclitus, I know.
Yeah, I really like the idea of. I mean, I got turned on to him by Nietzsche and Heidegger. I like the idea of this concept of this becoming, and then also knowing that there's a type of, with the idea of flux that Heraclitus talks about, which is this. It has this. It's like there's like an organic way of understanding how living things are in the world, right? How they are. And I find that when you look at time, or time as we understand it conceptually, it's in these things, right? It's in becoming, it's in this state of flux that something, if you look at something in time, so I mean, a river is a great way to think of this, right? If you look at a river flowing, and you pick one spot in the river, and you follow you follow a leaf that's in the river, and you just look at it right in one moment in the present. And as soon as it moves, it's already in the future, and that becomes the new present. And you can still remember where it was. That was the past. And I find that there's this kind of exchange between the philosophy of Heraclitus that is, yes, about the world and nature, but it's also about, for us, all of us as organisms, how we understand where things are in time and how we are continuing to be in some ways always, in terms of how time is constructed, we always have the past with us, right, in each present moment. And we have all these potential ways of understanding the future and where it could go. And there's something very powerful of, if you just strip away all of that and you just are, then you have a strange relationship with time itself. We think in terms of clock time or calendar time or whatever, always, or most of the time. But I think if you were to try to step outside of time and what does it mean to be and to exist, that to me is something obviously existential, but it's something about us as humans. And then to know you can find or value from those things or not, or but these things are, and to know that all living organisms on the planet are also in that same way, but they may not have a concept of those things. And we have this, gift, if you will, of understanding this concept of it. So to me, it was, Heraclitus is powerful to me because he's not talking necessarily about, human morality or ethics, but by rooting it in the natural world, or even in as a kind of philosophy of cosmology, it has impact for us as humans, and we can derive a lot of meaning and value from that philosophy, even without him directly, talking about human, ethics or morals or things like that. Those are just some of the things that are particularly, I guess, arresting for me from Heraclitus.
It speaks to our experience, because
yes,
things are always changing, and so, I mean, in I guess in various senses, we're always changing. The standard interpretation of you can't step twice into the same river is, first of all, the river keeps flowing, and so it's different water, and things are happening to the banks and to the riverbed, but then also, the point is made that you can't step into the same river twice because you're not the same.
That's right. Yeah, there's never this, nothing's static, right? And yet, right, it's like, how do you understand?
And yet,
right. How do you understand that?
Well, I mean, you mentioned memory, which seems to play an important role here.
Well,
I always think of I don't really know the truth about cow memory, but I know how Nietzsche imagines the cows. And, the cows don't have any memory, and so they just live in the moment. He says it's very nice. This is at the beginning of the second untimely meditation, the use and abuse of history for life.
Yeah.
And he says the cows are neither melancholy nor bored. They're in the moment.
I talked about this recently with somebody, Justin Gregg, who wrote a book called "If Nietzsche Were a Narwhal." This is a funny title. Nice.
That's a funny title.
And it's less about philosophy. It's more of like a kind of consciousness raising title of sorts. But he's writing about animal intelligence, and writes about we're not so special, and in some ways we are, right? Yeah, I guess the whole idea, it's a weird, contradictions are interesting to me, because we want to, I know I do, but so many people want to be consistent, and they want to be, we don't want to have contradictions, or we don't want to, have these paradoxes of sorts. But the more and more I realize that we're just a bag of contradictions, and it doesn't quite make sense. But how we find how we navigate that, it's a really weird thing. So what I mean by that is, if everything is not static in this world, right? The world itself isn't static, and we certainly aren't static, right? We're always changing. So the whole river thing, right? The river's changing, we're changing, right? We're influencing it. And yet we push, as we should, I think, for how do we have stillness? How do we meditate? How are we mindful? How are we present, right? These are all the things we talk about all the time. And I don't know how those two sit together, because I think you can do those things, but it's less about trying to be still and more about being aware, which I think is different, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're aware of the ideas and things that we're doing. If we're focused on it, we're just less aware of it when we're busy with life or busy doing things. So if I sit down and I do, 20 minutes of meditation, things are still moving. Things are still going on in the world and even within me. I'm just more mindful. I'm more present. I'm more aware of it. But there's never true stillness in the sense that like things stop.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always this movement, and it's like it's interesting because there's like I don't want to say like an energy, but this goes into the idea that Heraclitus had, at least is how I try to understand it, and it's a hard thing, it's Heidegger tries to explain this, and again, it was half of it was over my head because literally half of it was written in Greek, and my Greek isn't that good. But the logos, right, is this idea of what is this idea, this universal law that's tying the cosmos together? How do we understand that?
Yeah, which Heraclitus suggests that there's some kind of logos that underlies or inheres in reality.
Yeah, and I don't know what to make of that. I think he's right, potentially. I just don't know what it is, what that looks like. But he would, it would make some kind of sense, right? So, yeah, I don't know. And I know plenty of people have talked about it since then. But I don't know. Yeah. What are your thoughts on this?
Hegel would like the idea that there's some kind of, because logos can be translated all these different ways, word, story, study, reason.
God, that's the other thing. Yeah.
Well, of course, it becomes that in the context of the Gospel of John, because in the beginning was the logos,
right?
But this idea that reason is in the world, it doesn't. Hegel really likes it, and it doesn't seem so far-fetched to me either. One way of thinking about it is to be sort of a subjectivist about this, right? That and in a way, this is Kant's position that these are just our concepts and our ways of thinking about the world, and there's a gap between our subjective thinking, reason, logos, and reality. That there's a division, and one of the central goals of Hegel's philosophy is to try and show how that distinction is not, or that gap doesn't actually exist, right? That reason is in the world, but I'm still trying to understand exactly how to think about this. One example I give my students is like laws of nature. Seems to be some kind of reason in the world, some kind of measure or regularity.
And I wonder where the ideas of, if you take Darwinianism, if you take Freud, if you take Nietzsche, they all get at this thing of will to power, drives, natural selection. They're coming at it from different angles, but it seems like there's always this thing. There's always something there, right? If you take a Freudian perspective, it's drives, right? You have the two major drives, sex and aggression, which are more of categories, if anything else, although it is also the things themselves. And really Freud was doing, tripart soul of Plato. There's a lot of in a clinical way. I think he was trying to do some of that. But you see this obviously with Nietzsche, with will to power. There's always this kind of like an energy, a force, a unifying thing that's going on. Like everyone's picking up on this in different ways. And what that is, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. And I think the logos is somewhere here, but I think you can do it without any religious or spiritual context. You can use that as well if you want to, but I think it doesn't necessarily mean it's required. And so it's interesting how, in terms of thought, you can, kind of like you're saying, you can have objective reason, and this is what much of German idealism is doing. Kant and Hegel, they're trying to do it, right? And was it Heidegger that said, the subjective is wrapped up in the objective, right? There's this idea where there's a symmetry here, right? There's an overlap here, and so. And you see this with the phenomenologists, right? If you see where they're saying things, where they're talking about, Heidegger has elements of this, obviously Husserl and Merleau-Ponty, where it's, well, what's the experience, right? It's not objective, it's not subjective, it's the experience of all of that. Again, that's a kind of on a personal human level. So we've gone from cosmology to the human, but it's still the same kind of thing of how are we understanding what's pushing, what's driving, what's animating, what's activating things in the world, including ourselves, for doing or not doing certain things. And I just don't think we know.
Yeah, we're trying to understand reality, and of course, we're part of that reality.
Right.
And we're not outside of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Heraclitus says, with respect, I found a nice passage. I was looking at some, and I don't know. This is from Daniel Graham's translation.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is Heraclitus. He says, if you went in search of it, you would not find the limits of the soul, though you traveled every road, so deep is its measure.
It's like a bottomless well.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's Nietzsche thought, the commanding people to pursue self-knowledge was cruel, because you're sort of setting people up for an endless task. But of course, Nietzsche liked to be provocative.
Yeah, well, he definitely did. He liked to make people upset, and I think somewhat intentionally, but you're right. I think what's going on. We're still trying to understand ourselves and reality, and it's what do we get? We get lots of different sort of pieces of the puzzle. There's no sort of definitive logos that encompasses everything. It seems like there's always more to say, no matter what you say. No matter what anyone says, there's always more to say. Well, you haven't paid attention to this. You haven't thought about that. Yeah, and I think that's this is always my frustration. Although it's the thing of getting older, right? When you get older, you just kind of get more. I don't know. This is my experience. You get less. You get less, I don't want to say less passionate, but you become less sure of yourself. In some ways.
I know what you're talking about.
It's like, I see that perspective now. So with German idealism, I didn't like it for a long time. I got it, but I was like, it just doesn't, it's so obnoxious. Just this whole rationality kind of thing. And it's like, I get it, but and I don't know. I don't feel that way anymore. I feel like it has limits, and there's so many other things, but that has a really important place, right? Kant and Hegel have a tremendous. I mean, if we didn't have those thinkers, so much of the so-called Enlightenment or Western Enlightenment, and so many things we've had, and are a product of their thought and their organization and their systems, and that they're really helpful. But
and Hegel was so influential, and in part, I mean, his influence, we see it in especially in those figures that opposed him, like Marx and Kierkegaard and Levinas, and
I mean, he's a giant. I mean, he's
the list could go on, and so but that's, in a way, that's how Hegel thinks philosophy is supposed to work, right? It's dialectical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And of course, there's this interpretation of Hegel that like somehow he understands himself as having brought philosophy to completion. I don't think that's a particularly good reading of Hegel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
he sees it as dialectical, and it's and the idea is that the because you look at philosophy, there's just like tremendous diversity.
Oh yeah,
thought. Yeah, I mean, there's like tremendous diversity of thought in philosophy, and I mean, there are also similarities, but I mean, like Descartes' philosophy is very different from Spinoza's, even though in many ways they're very, very close.
Mm-hmm.
Just to take that as an example, Plato and Aristotle, another example.
Mm-hmm.
But Hegel's idea is that it's not just that they contradict each other or something like that. Like each one contributes something.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in a way, the historically philosophy is progressive. Hegel thinks.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me jump ahead here. I mean, this is a thought that's come to me.
I guess I should say makes progress.
Yeah. To that end, when I think about philosophy nowadays, right, in a kind of quasi-modern sense,
yeah,
we spend so much of our time thinking about morals and ethics.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good thing, but it's like anything else, right? I mean, some of that stuff just gets boring.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other things to consider in life or in the world than just morals and ethics, right? And for so long, people thought about the universe and the world and what it means to be in the world, and time and space and phenomenology and rationality and idealism and realism. A god or a deity, or there's all these things. And maybe it's just a season, maybe it's just a time. But I wonder, what are other things philosophy should consider outside of morals and ethics?
Well, I have to ask you, what are we when we're talking about morals and ethics? What are we talking about exactly?
So people, I think, are concerned about what are the right or wrong ways to treat animals. What are the right or wrong ways to treat other humans?
Right.
How should we have an ethics for war? How should we have an ethics for humane treatment? How should we have morals or ethics about our relationships? How should we have an ethics for the planets? How should we have, just on and on and on. And these are all super important.
Yeah, right. All good questions.
These are all great. These are all great. I love all of these things.
Yeah.
But I wonder if there are other things as well. And maybe there are, right? I mean, I'm not saying there aren't. I feel like, obviously, the last big, I don't know how you think of it, but the last big period of philosophy, I don't know what you would call now, but was postmodernism and deconstructionism. And I don't know if we have a new period now, or if we're just still in kind of the remnants of that.
It's not really clear what's going on. Yeah.
Right. So that's what I'm curious about. Like, where do we go? Like, if deconstruction is, let's just break everything down, I think there's a good piece of that in terms of exercise. But, well, then what? How do we understand other things? And obviously there are things that we understand with science.
Yes.
But how do we continue to have ideas about, I think there's some interesting stuff with technology or with artificial intelligence or, things of that nature. But I mean,
and of course we get a lot of ethical questions there as well.
Right. And I wonder.
And there's a question how to think about technology. Heidegger was very interested in that. This particular question.
Yeah, I just think about it in terms of how do we understand this?
Yeah, I mean, do you want my simple, like, what I tell people like, what is philosophy?
Mm-hmm.
It's like philosophy basically has two major branches, and the one is theory and the other is practice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what do I mean by this? And there's a great. You maybe know the text by Boethius, The Consolation of Philosophy?
Mm-mm.
he's like, oh, you should read it. You would,
Mm.
yeah, it's great. It's fantastic. I got it from my dad, and he loved it.
Mm.
But he's in prison. He wrote it while he was on death row.
Mm.
In the 520s. And so it's the consolation of philosophy. Philosophy appears in his prison cell as a woman to console him. And she's wearing a dress, and at the top of the dress there's a theta, and at the bottom of the dress there's the pi, and there's a ladder connecting the theta and the pi. And so the pi is practice,
Mm-hmm.
and the theta is theoria, theory or speculation. And so, all right, so I told you it was my brief account of what philosophy is, but basically that's my understanding of what philosophy is. Philosophy is practical, so it's about what kind of person should I become? What's the right thing to do in a particular situation? I really like this idea of like, what kind of person should I become? That's very Aristotelian.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of person should I become, and like, how do I do that?
Yeah.
But then also these questions of what's the best political order? What's the best economic system? So these kinds of practical questions. And one thing about practical matters is that they can be otherwise, depending on what we do, right? So like the United States could be whatever. We could decide to institute a monarchy. I hope we don't, but we could. It's not, the United States isn't a democracy, of necessity or something like that.
It's more of an oligarchy.
Well, yeah.
with
So
some
liberal.
with some democratic phases in there.
Yeah, some democratic elements, and mostly liberal in the sense, which I always have to explain this, especially to my beginning students. Liberal means free.
Mm-hmm.
Has to do with liberties. They hear liberal and they think, I don't know what,
Mm-hmm.
FDR or Nancy Pelosi.
Right.
Yeah. But then, speculation or theory concerns really what can't be otherwise. Aristotle thinks. So like nature is what it is in a way, right? Like it's not, we don't, it's, what we can do is contemplate it or study it.
Mm-hmm.
But it itself doesn't change.
I would agree with that. What we continue to understand or learn more about what it is and isn't, but
yes.
And
the more we find out, the weirder it is, maybe.
Yeah. And there's numerous examples of this. I mean, listen to any conversation I've had on here with people that study animals for a living.
Yeah.
It's like,
we're making some progress there, which is great.
Yeah. We're learning so many things. I guess the thing about, and there's plenty of people that are doing this now, is, this is really probably in your world than anything else. But how do we make philosophy applicable to people's everyday lives? Because we use it all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people just see philosophy as like, old Greek dudes in robes with beards, thinking about the world and navel gazing, and that's really not what philosophy is. I get the stereotype or whatever, or the image, but
it always for me, it always has this pronounced practical dimension,
mm-hmm.
and part of that means being concerned with what's going on in the world right now.
Mm-hmm. How do we? I feel like some people find that even if you are concerned with what goes on in the world, how do you apply philosophy to things currently, right? So people can say, well, you theoretically can have these ideas or you can build these systems, but how do we apply it? And I think that's where it becomes interesting, I guess, because what some people will say is, well, they'll water down some of these philosophical things, and they'll be a life coach or motivational speaker or whatever. And I don't know if that's the right way to do it, but how does the applied piece of philosophy important?
Well, I don't know if we've talked about this before, but one thing I think, in the United States, we don't teach philosophy in high school, and we certainly don't teach it in elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
But there are people who are working on this. So there's a philosophy for children movement, which is basically in the United States. It's headquartered in Seattle, and it's great. I've visited their center.
That's cool.
I've gone around and observed them teaching, kindergarten class. And I actually did this with some friends and colleagues where we taught philosophy to fourth graders in Pittsburgh. So that was cool. I think we could use just a starting point would be to give people more exposure to philosophy. And one way to do that is to introduce it in the school.
Yeah, so, I would agree.
It's really hard for university philosophy programs. I mean, maybe not everywhere, but in a lot of places, students come into university and they haven't had any exposure to philosophy. So how are philosophy departments even supposed to get majors? They've been exposed to history or physics in high school, and so they know if they like it or they don't. And but philosophy, they don't. I mean, I think many students don't even know that it exists.
Yeah, and I think they just don't see where do they put it, and I think that's super important to say, like, this is super, I think, necessary, and how you have a way of looking at the world and humans, and yeah, it is. I do find that's important. I get, what I get asked a lot. Maybe you get asked this too. Is if I want to read philosophy, where do I start? And that's that's a hard question to answer, right?
Yeah. That's an extremely difficult question to answer.
Because you just go through periods, right? I've done this. You've done this. You just go. I'm sitting with with Heidegger for 6 months, or I'm sitting with Nietzsche for 2 years, or I'm sitting with Aristotle for 2 years. Or I usually tell people Aristotle. I tell them to read the Ethics. But I mean, because it's the aphorisms.
For me, it was the portable Nietzsche. That's what really.
This is great. Yeah, he's great.
Portable Nietzsche was a good starting point. I don't know. I mean, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics is a good recommendation.
Yeah,
I give people the Symposium sometimes. For a while, I was like buying I don't know. It was like the Oxford World's Classics, Robin Waterfield translation of the Symposium was like really cheap, so I just bought a bunch. I was like handing them out like a missionary.
You were the Mormons or Jehovah's Witness or whatever. They come knocking on your door.
Proselytizing for Plato. Yeah, but it's really hard to know where to start, and you just sort of get going somewhere, and then, like you said, you read this one for a couple weeks or a month or 2 months, and then
there's a period I read all of Locke. There's a period I read all of Hume.
Locke's great. Locke is great. Locke is underrated.
He is. Especially with Dewey's great on education.
Especially
Kant is obviously huge. You got to get there, and I feel like there's these things.
I realize more and more like Locke's essay is actually the best introduction to the critique of pure reason.
I haven't read it in a long time, but yeah, I mean he's great. So let's talk about this idea of immanence versus transcendence. What is jostling around in your brain on these two subjects here? Maybe define them first, or how they're conceptualized. And
they're you can use them in different ways. I mean, for one thing, but I mean, one way of thinking of transcendence is that like there's something that just like completely transcends our ability to know, right? So in Kant, this appears as the thing in itself, right? Like the pure concepts of the understanding and all our other sort of mental equipment, it doesn't apply to the thing in itself. There's this idea that like reality itself, whatever it is, transcends our ability to know it.
Would you put love and maybe art and different forms of art, and would you put that in there, or is that a separate category?
Love and art with respect to transcendence. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You could say like, well, yeah, I don't know. What do you have in mind? You could say like, oh, art points to the.
That's true, right? Is right the like thing of it itself, right? When you're creating something
in like a religious context.
Yeah.
this idea, I mean, you get it in medieval philosophy. It's like we can know something about God. We can maybe know what God isn't, but can we really know God? No, it transcends our poor power.
The transcendence is the things outside of ourselves we can't understand.
Yeah.
What did you put love in there?
Yeah, love is well, I mean, again, love seem like art would seem to for Plato, love, at least in the form of eros, sort of moves us towards the transcendent.
So it's like a vehicle towards the transcendent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so it points towards the transcendent. And for Plato too, I mean, you know that his basic idea is this theory of forms. And there's a question: can we really know the forms? Can we really know what their nature is, and so on and so forth? And I mean, that's some of the first to use, maybe one of the first to use the word philosophia was Pythagoras. But Plato certainly takes it up to mean that, like, the philosophers they love wisdom because they're not wise. Like you, in a way, in Plato, you love what you lack. And so the idea is we can't become truly wise. It's beyond the power of us mere mortals to become truly wise. The best we can do is to love wisdom and pursue it.
It's like an aspirational thing. We never get there. Never get there.
But then there are other philosophers like Hegel and maybe Deleuze who are like, no, there isn't a transcendent. I mean, it's clearest in Hegel. Hegel thinks like we can actually know reality, including God. And that there's nothing beyond our ability to know in some sense. He has this famous quote, the rational is the actual and the actual is the rational. But in a way, there's still some remainder in Hegel, which is like the irrational, right? He's very explicit, like, to say that the actual is rational doesn't mean to say that everything that exists is rational. There's still some irrational remainder that is incomprehensible to us.
I'll come back to this. So where does this tie in with the immanence?
Well, immanence is, in a way to think about it, it's just that it's the opposite of transcendence, right?
Like, so all the things we can know and see and touch and feel.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if we talk about it in terms of knowledge, I framed it in terms of knowledge at first. I mean, immanence, one way to think about immanence is that there's no outside, right? There's no other realm or beyond reality.
So this is very much.
I mean, Spinoza is also someone who comes to mind here as a sort of thinker of radical immanence. Even though in Spinoza too, I think there are little hints of transcendence here and there. Like God has infinite attributes. We only experience two. Well, what's going on with those others?
So it's this push for knowing what's real or reality itself.
Yes.
Well, what do you think?
What do I think? I think I'm tempted by. Yeah, I think I don't know. I really don't know. Yeah.
So let's see it. Let's see it this way. In my hand are a pair of glasses, right? Yes. Which I need to see because I'm nearsighted. Worse and worse by the day. And
it happens, and you're going to have to get, eventually you're going to have to get these like
bifocals.
Yeah, whatever, progressive lenses.
Yeah, right. It's fine. I've resigned to it. After 40, it's all downhill. We start losing hearing. We start losing vision after 40.
Yeah, and you're just it's a little surprising that it actually happens to you.
Yeah, it's like, oh, that happens, and it happens to everybody, but not me. And then it happens to you. You're like, oh shit. But this is real. Like I'm holding it's a real object. Right?
Sure.
Right. And me talking about it and telling you about it through technology is real. This moment is really happening. Right? This is what people would say. This is really happening. It's happening in reality. The fact that I'm sitting in this chair and I'm talking into this mic at a table, and I have my glasses in my hand, and I'm looking at you, looking at me through a screen, and we're this is a real experience, and this is the thing we call reality, right? Or no?
Maybe, yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I think, there's this idea that like what we know the truth about things through thinking about them. So I mean, the question is, and of course you just gave this nice account, and what's your, like, what are you're pointing to this sort of holding the glasses in your hand, so on and so forth. Is the truth in what you say, or is the truth out there? Are you just talking about what's real, or is what's real what you're saying?
Well, the answer is, in my view, is that it's true in one sense.
Okay.
So it's not completely true. It's true because I know it. It's true because it's happening to me. But that doesn't make it objectively or outside of that true. It's true because of something is happening, something is there. But how I'm classifying it, how I'm organizing it, how my sense perception is interacting with it, doesn't make it absolutely true. It's true for me. Now, somebody may see it, but they're going to have a different experience of it. But the fact that objects exist, well, that's not all there is, because a subject exists. That's not all there is. And
there's a lot going on at any given
There's a lot going on that I'm not aware of. And there's a lot going on from different perspectives.
And because we can only attend to one thing at a time.
Yeah, and if you take a third eye view here, and if you were to leave your body for a minute and you were to watch yourself, right?
Yeah.
You would see that there's so many things going on. And there's so many things going on in all of these various kinds of dimensions of existing, right? We're existing in 3 or 4, but who knows how we're existing in other ways, if at all. And what happens if you can't think it, and if you can't use your senses to know it, does that mean it doesn't happen? And I would say no, it does happen. But you just can't know it. Now, some people may say, well, then it doesn't really matter. Well, that's a value judgment. That's something different. But in terms of reality, what does exist, I think, unlike Hegel and maybe Kant, there are things outside of what we know that do exist, and we may or may not know them. I just don't think we're a lockbox of like everything is here and we can eventually know all of it. I just don't think that exists. I think it's impossible because we're just a multicellular organism with some big, dense brains.
Well, and I think, again, I think for Hegel, that is what he's going to say is those things that we can't know aren't really real. right? Like,
but how would you know? How would you know?
There are all these contingencies, historical contingencies, and so on and so forth. So like, why we were talking in class the other day about like, why are, if people are all share the same nature, why are we so different? Why is there so much difference and diversity? And I think Hegel's just going to say historical contingencies.
Mm-hmm.
But like the truth about us is that we're Geist, that we're mind or spirit. And once we know that about ourselves, of course, there's a question like, what does that mean? And to be Geist, what is Geist, and so on and so forth. And Hegel's point seems to be, once we know that about ourselves, we know what there is to know. Like, we're in touch with actuality. And that, like, what falls outside of that, I mean, it exists in some sense, but it isn't really real. So, I mean, you get into this sort of idea of like, again, you can draw comparisons with Buddhism, or you can think of Schopenhauer here. That in a way, like or Plato's cave, in a way, like the truth of things is not how things appear.
But yes, I agree. But the problem with this view, in my opinion, is that it's too parochial, right? So I get it, but I also don't. So it's like, we only know what we know. That doesn't mean that there aren't other things outside of it. Like, just because there's things outside of it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means we don't know it.
Yeah, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of by your philosophy.
Even on the planet, even on other planets, there's just things we just don't. And then it's also the idea of time. We're in this moment in time. All of the things that we know after this, we don't know now, but we will know at some other point.
Yeah, and the moment is so fleeting, right? I mean, and think of how much of it, like, we've forgotten, right? Like, how much of your life you've forgotten.
Yes, because if you were to ask me to catalog, okay, what happened in the moment, on, April 2nd, 1994.
Yeah,
I don't have a fucking clue. But the point is,
what did you have for lunch on that day?
But that's one aspect. What was I thinking? What was I feeling? What was I intuiting? What was I? That's all those dimensions of things. I think you can't go back and do that. Well, this goes back to Heraclitus, right? It's all, flux. But the point is that reality is important. I think reality is important to know. I have people that argue with this with me. There's just all logic and reason all the way down. And that's really important. And it's really, really helpful. But it doesn't answer everything. It answers a lot of things. But I do, and again, maybe this is the shadow of God, which we'll come to. But I don't think that there's a supreme being. I don't think there's a deity. I don't think there's a God. I don't think or many gods. I don't believe in any of that. Yeah. Right? I don't believe in any of that. So it's not like this.
What about like Spinozistic God?
No, well, if I believed in a God, right? Because that just gets into like a monism.
If you believed in a God, it would be
Spinoza's God, right? It's like every atheist's favorite answer. Sure. But I don't, right? I mean, and maybe I'm wrong. I'll find out at some point, or I won't. But the point is that there is things outside of our human limits and understanding, and there's things outside of reason.
Like, how do you know that? Like,
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know cognitively, but I can know in other ways. I can know from things I can't know from things that are beyond reason, and I can know from things that I can extrapolate, such as, or maybe these kind of pointers.
Yeah.
Art, love, big concepts, a type of right and wrong, again, which is that's a kind of thing that we create, but, there's elements of things in the world where I can't explain all of my feelings or my interactions or some intuitions or certain instincts. And I don't think they come from within, but I think that they're giving me clues about things I can't explain outside.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I literally cannot explain it. I can't rationally explain it. I can't verbally explain it. But it's that, and it's not just, it's experience, but it's experience because that's how it's coming to me. But I think it's beyond that. It's outside of that. And I don't think you need to go, quasi-spiritual here on this to understand that. I think you just need to know there's things outside of our limits, cognitively and rationally. I mean, there is a cognitive aspect to emotions, but not all of it. And emotions are definitely a real thing that happens to people.
Sure.
And there's different experiences we have.
But of course they are intelligible to some extent. I mean, we have an account of what anger is. We have an account of. I mean,
but if you ask somebody,
and we already said there's always more to say, or there's always something we fail to pay attention to. I mean, we said that earlier.
Right. But if you were to ask somebody, right now, this gets really philosophical, right? So, if you ask somebody what's anger,
yeah,
you're going to get 10 different answers if you ask 10 different people, or I don't know, maybe you get 5 different answers if you ask 10 different people.
Yeah.
In my view on this is with emotions, I think most emotions or many emotions are universal. All humans feel anger.
Mm-hmm.
All humans feel pride, sadness. That's what it means to be human, right? Partially. Yeah. So there's a component of it. It's an ingredient. There are people that would say no. These are just constructs. These are ways in which people socially construct them. What I would say is that we have emotions. All humans have the experience of that. We're going to call it certain things. We're going to describe it different ways. What comes differently is our expression of these emotions are going to be different. And to me, that's an important distinction. Right?
You mean expression, like how we act on the basis of these emotions?
Yeah. How we act, or how it's manifested for us non-verbally, or in our body or in our face, right?
Yeah.
Might be different. So, like, a good example.
Who knows? And I mean, it's like, what's it like to be a bad? I mean, what's it like to be another person? Like, I don't.
Right.
We never get to feel what it's like to be someone else.
And don't get me wrong, there are cultural loadings on some of these things. So, like, shame looks different in Japan than it does here in the United States. I mean, it actually looks different, and it has different cultural things.
Well, yeah, and you're assuming that we actually still have a sense of shame in the United States.
Right, but we don't have that anymore. Right, but like the human experience, right? Like, if I were to do something terrible and I might feel guilty about it, but I also might feel shameful about it. There's different ways that's experienced and then manifested in different countries around the world, but I still think I think shame is a tricky one, but there's still the idea of shame. Because you have a positive valence or a negative valence about an emotion doesn't mean that it doesn't exist or you're just constructing it. It just means that you have a different valence on it. That's it.
Shame and guilt are super interesting. And I think one thing I've been thinking about recently is that, you can be guilty, but not feel guilty. So you can be guilty of something and not feel guilty. But you can't be ashamed of something without feeling ashamed.
I would say that's probably right.
Now, of course, other people might try to shame you, and it might not work. There's that. But somehow the thing and the feeling seem to be more closely connected in the case of shame than they are in the case of guilt.
It's hard. I don't know. I have to think about that.
And then the other thing is, like, what's the difference between feeling guilty and feeling ashamed?
Well, so here's a major distinction we know now about the differences between guilt and shame. So guilt is, I stole a candy bar from 7-Eleven. Whoops, I shouldn't have done that. I feel bad about doing that. Right?
Yeah.
I feel bad. Guilt usually leads to reparative action. So, damn it. I shouldn't have done that. Okay, I feel bad. Let me return the candy bar. Let me give money back or something. Let me go apologize. Shame is, oh, I stole the candy bar, and now I realize that that's not right to do, or whatever. I've been caught or something, or even if you haven't.
Yep.
But you know that it wasn't the thing that you should do, and now you feel that you're a horrible human being. You feel like you're a horrible person, and I can fix it, but I'm still going to feel horrible. I'm still going to feel like there's something about me that was defective, that was wrong in that. And then that's usually a sense of wanting to kind of like, this kind of sinking into the ground. And usually you feel like you can't change it and you can't repair it. Because I can return the candy bar and that's fine, guilt absolved. But the feeling of, I did this and there's something defective with me doing this, just usually makes you feel hopeless and angry.
So that's good. There's also this idea that shame somehow has to do with like the opinions that other people have about us, or the opinions that
100%
other people have about us. So we look in the eyes of others, or how we imagine ourselves to look in the eyes.
Yes. So guilt and shame are both what we call social emotions, meaning that there's a social component to it. And part of that is because we're social mammals. So we have all of these systems
political
of sorts.
Animal. Aristotle says political animals.
Yes. So we understand this. We can feel private shame, right? There could be nobody around. You could be by yourself in the shower, sure. Door locked, no windows, no one's going to see you, and you can feel shame, right? How is that possible, right? If it's a social emotion, how is that possible? And a lot of this has to do with our imagery that we use. We know that if there were people around, we know that if this does get realized in a social context, it would be shameful. So we already feel this. We feel this kind of infused with us, right? So it's like, you can still feel bad about it because of the potentiality of it being socialized. So as an example, let me just take an obvious example. Let's say somebody records, let's say you record something on your phone or something of you saying something really terrible about another person. Just absolutely just dogging them. And you think about it and you say, ooh, I feel bad about that. I did a thing, I feel bad. But then there's something about you feeling something about you feels wrong or defective because I said that and I feel shamed about doing that. And if somebody were to listen to this, or if it were to get out, I would feel even more shame. But even before it gets you could be, again, by yourself in a room recording this, just for the sake of argument. It's the idea of, if people were to hear this, the idea of the social component is in your mind giving you these feelings of shame. Yeah. You don't feel any shame really.
You know this idea. That. Yeah. I mean, we know this idea from all kinds of contexts, but I think first of Freudian psychology and this idea that we internalize the social.
Oh yeah.
First and foremost, our parents.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's informing us about who we are as humans.
Yeah, if that's true, it's always with us.
Yeah, yeah. So
even when we're alone.
Yes. And so we're walking around with these. So it's this weird. We're so for what it means to be human, I just don't see this from all aspects: anthropology, evolutionary biology, psychology, sociology. We're social animals, and all the good stuff and all the bad stuff. So when we're alone, we're with other people, we're with one other person, we're with 20 or 200 people. We're never not social, even if we're alone, which is a really weird thing to think about. Yeah. If you're taking a walk through the forest and you're by yourself and you are a social animal walking around by yourself, but you're never not a social animal.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, there can be these meditative experiences. Rousseau talks about enjoying the sentiment of our own existence. And in a way, I think in those moments, we've forgotten the social, or it's receded in some way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we're, for the most part, we're social, and and if we're thinking, language itself isn't language itself a kind of social?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I think, in language is, that's such a hard thing to know. Even anthropologists don't know this. How we've evolved language is such a mystery.
George Carlin has, the George Carlin joke is like, people are always telling me to put things in my own words. So I don't know about you, but I'm using the same words as everybody else. He
is an absolute legend. Yeah, it's hilarious. Yeah, I mean, the evolutionary history of it is still a mystery. But yes, I think it's a product of socialization for sure. I think that's probably important. I think that's an important feature. So one thing that I also want to tackle here, something that we both have thought about and read about, and so I don't think we've actually talked about it at length, so it'd be interesting to do this, is you and I are big fans of Nietzsche, and so he most famously talked about the death of God. It's one of his most famous things. He's famous for a lot of the other things. So it's in that like Antichrist pamphlet, in terms of, he talks more about that. It's obviously referenced in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which is, his best work, I would say. But it shows up, I believe, at first in The Gay Science, which is my favorite work.
Section 108.
Yeah. Yes. No, I have, is it 108? I have 125.
Well, 125 is the Madman.
You're right. You're right.
Okay. 108, and it's sort of important. 108 is sort of important because he's not speaking in another persona in 108.
Yes. Okay, so here's what I'll do. So yeah, in The Gay Science, book 3 of 5 books, I believe. Yes. Aphorism 108. So it's I'm going to read this. So it's called New Struggles. This is what it says. After Buddha was dead, his shadow was still shown for centuries in a cave, a tremendous, gruesome shadow. God is dead, but given the way of men, there may still be caves for thousands of years in which his shadow will be shown, and we still have to vanquish his shadow too. So it's tremendous. Before I go to 125, what do you want to say on this?
I mean, it's such an interesting aphorism. First of all, what's he talking about when he says God is dead? So one of the things that I've been looking at recently, Peter Berger, the sociologist he did the social construction of reality with Thomas Luckman, I think it was.
Peter Bergman, right? Is that what it is?
Berger, yeah.
Berger, yeah. The name is ringing a bell.
Well, he came out with I think he passed some years, not too long ago, but he came out with a book also, not too long ago, called The Many Altars of Modernity. And one thing he argues in that book is like against what's called like the secularization thesis in sociology of religion. Basically the idea that as modernity progresses, religion declines. Yeah. And he says this can't be right because if you look at the world, religion is flourishing. There may be some exceptions. Like he notes that Europe is possibly an exception. He's like, but for the most part, religion is flourishing in the modern world. So can Nietzsche be right? That about when he says that God is dead. And what is he talking about after all? What does he mean when he says that God is dead?
So I'll say this. I wonder. I mean, Nietzsche was a really brilliant thinker. When I look at this and I read this, I wonder if it has a multiplicity of meanings for him. Mm-hmm. I don't know if he meant it to be one meaning. And I think he probably thought about a lot of different things. And this is his distilled summary of what he was thinking, but he's behind all of it is a lot of stuff. So I think there's I don't think it's the actual, like an actual God of sorts, but I do think it's a type of the ways in which religion has organized itself is dead. And I don't think he sees that as necessarily a good thing. I think.
Well, he sees it as an opening, I think.
Yes.
It sort of could go either way.
Yes. But I think it's important. So there's two things contextually there, right? So again, I don't have obviously the German in front of me, but which would be pretty pointless because I don't speak German. But the idea is that he's talking about Buddha and Buddha dying. Mm-hmm. But he talks about the shadow living onward.
Yes.
And he's making the same, it sounds like, juxtaposition here. God is dead, or the idea of God, or how we worship God, or how people have worshiped God, which is given us maybe to modernity. That God, the actual God, how it's been conceptualized, maybe through religion, maybe through all these other things, is dead, right? But the shadow of it, and I think it's maybe then that still lives on, and I think he's trying to say in this way of, look, people don't really believe a lot of this stuff in the way it was intended or the way that it was designed. We all have these versions of it. And so we have this shadow that lives for thousands of years on in other ways. Now, he could be talking about reason. He could be talking about philosophy in general. He could be talking about modernity. He could be talking about religion. He could be talking about an actual, Judeo-Christian God. Or it could be all of those things. But I think what's encapsulated is this. I think the bigger picture here is that we don't get close to the real form anymore. Everything is a remnant of it. It's a shadow. It's a type of what's that called? Imitation. And that this shadow idea of God and of religion is something that helped men progress forward through to modernity, but that it's so far from what it was that the actual thing isn't there anymore, and we just have this kind of shadow that looms large and is going to continue to loom large. And I agree, it's a kind of opening of that could be a really bad thing, that could maybe be a good thing, but that's where he kind of sees it. That's my reading of it.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, one thing I've been thinking is that I think we can make a distinction between like the content of the concept of God, whatever exactly that may be, and like its position in a certain structure, like a logical social structure. And so like, what's the position? The position is something like, you might call it like the ultimate criterion or the ultimate point of reference for everything in the society, right? Like, so it has meaning, or it has worth, or it's bad.
Yeah.
Relative to this idea. And so it provides a sort of organizing function and a kind of, I don't know, how do you say it, like a kind of ultimate measure. And so, I mean, I do think that with respect to that content of the idea, I think it's clear from his writings that he has in mind the particular God, the primarily the Christian God that has been at the center of European life for more than a millennium by the time Nietzsche's writing. And of course, this idea was a central organizing idea that gave meaning. That answered the question. He says, you of course, one of the famous formulations of nihilism, from the will to power. The question why finds no answer. God provided an answer to that question, for a millennium and more within Europe. I mean, Nietzsche tends to be focused on Europe. So then the question is like, well, what are these shadows of God? But also the question is, when he says we need to vanquish these shadows, is he saying we need to vanquish only the shadows of the old Christian God that was so central to European culture for so long? Or is he saying something more radical, that we need to vanquish the position of ultimate value altogether? Right? Because I think other beings can fill that position. So like one of the things I've been thinking about, and they've been coming out with all these books about capitalism as religion, and so on and so forth. And I'm interested in that idea, the idea that somehow it's capital really that is the ultimate criterion in our culture, or that if you that money has come to like fill the position that was. And then you say, like, well, why do we do this? Why do we do that? Well, ultimately, it has its justification with respect to how it affects capital, the growth of capital.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think seeing God as, yes, a Christian God, for one, but I think there's another dimension of, okay, what is that providing, though, for people? And what that provides is an organizing structure of everything, right? How to live, how to die, what happens when you die, you live for eternity, how to live a moral life, how to be ethical, sense of community. It gives you all of this organizing structures and how to organize one's life and how to operate in the world. And in that way, if God is dead, what that represents, but then what it represents is what happens when you don't have an organizing structure anymore. And exactly what you're saying. You have a void, and people fill it with other things. They fill it with other types of organizing structures. And I think in a way, capitalism can be that, for sure. I think it's been other things, whether it's political ideology, whether it's social ideologies, whether it's other types of things. We need an organizing structure. And I think that's where he kind of bemoans, and that's what all of these shadows are. They're they're imitations of that organizing structure and that organizing principle.
And it's interesting because you mentioned it can be other things, and I've been thinking a lot lately too about how in America, at least, there seems to be this thing going on where people are investing their religious passions into political parties. Right.
I mean, yeah, it's people do say it's our new religions, but it's the same organizing structure, which is giving a lot of things. It's giving you guidance. It's telling you what to do. It's telling you what's true about the reality of the world. It's telling you how to live a good life. It's telling you how to have relationships. It's telling you how to, who to worship and who not to, and what you eat and what you don't eat, and who to make love to and who not to. I mean, it's just all those things. You don't have that anymore. You got to find it somewhere. You got to make it somewhere. And people are doing that with the same passion and zeal and commitment and, stubbornness that they would with those things. And that's where there's a danger in that, some of that stuff.
Well, capital seems like a nice candidate because, you say like, well, what are we doing? We even talk about education as like investing in your future, right? Like you're getting an education in order to put yourself in position to take up to serve a function within the current sort of social economic order.
Well, take capital for instance, right? That's great because it says that gives you stability, security, assurance, right? If you have it, and if you don't have it, it doesn't give you those things, right? So it's one of those things where it's like it's filling the void. Again, it's a shadow of the thing that was there, right? Yeah. And so, that in that way, right? How do we vanquish the shadow? Right? There seems to be that path of we still have to vanquish that.
Well, there's that question, right? I have that question. Is he talking about, are we just trying to vanquish a particular concept or content, or are we trying to abolish the position of ultimate being altogether? And can a society do without it, or is that, then are we in the sort of domain of nihilism without some ultimate reference point?
I think that's where it's tricky, right? Because if we're trying to, as humans, I don't know if Nietzsche thought that everyone could find, the overman, the Übermensch, right? But certainly some people could. And I think aspirationally, or even for some people, doing that is preferred. And when you think about a society of this reevaluation of all values, right? We're reevaluating our systems and our structures of how we interact with each other, how we think about cosmology, how we think about living, how we think about dying, in a way that is truly, truly human. Truly human. And something that you don't see a need for many of the structures or the ideas of deities or some sacredness or things like that. And, that's where, he talks about in other places of art that we make and art that we create is where truth is, right? It's coming from there. We don't need to find it from outside of anywhere else. We don't need to find it from the divine. And so this whole idea of reevaluation of values, I would say that it probably is some of the structure there. I can't be clear on it, but I would say it might be that kind of structure. Not that there isn't one, but that there is a human one where we don't have God and we don't have the shadow. We have the human structure.
Yeah, I'm happy you mentioned the Übermensch. Because, and it is, there are passages even in Zarathustra where like the Übermensch does seem to be something that in a way serves as at least as a goal. So like the goal of marriage is to bring forth the Übermensch,
right?
For example, so it's like that. It's the Übermensch sort of seems to appear as like that for the sake of which. Mm-hmm. Whereas I don't know, under the old, the other, I do it for the sake of God, or I do it for the sake of capital. No, I'm going to do it for the sake of the Übermensch. But then the question is this, and you suggest this with bringing up the reevaluation of values. The question is, does Nietzsche have something else in mind where this isn't like, the Übermensch isn't a sort of ultimate criterion in the same way that these others might be. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's more open-ended.
Mm-hmm. Well, because he didn't like giving systems of things, right? I think the biggest compliment he gave was that if anybody was going to make a system, it was going to be a Hegelian system. I think it was like the closest he got to a compliment because there was flexibility within it, right? Yeah. There was a way of a kind of opening. And I just don't think he was really into that, because I think he saw, not that he didn't see things as having order or structure. I think that he saw it because there was a lot of things that were, humans are in some ways limitless. And if we're limiting our potential value or our potential experiences or ways to enact upon our instinct, I think that always was something that it's just a lot of restraining of what it means to be human. Mm-hmm. And in that way, trying to have a way of maneuvering in the world that is very much truly human, right? It's not hedonism. It's not just, it's not without morals, but it's something that has the human instinct, I think, rooted in emotion and cognition as the centerpiece, as opposed to all of these various shadows that are obfuscating one's ability to fully to get at being human. And that's where Heidegger picks up on it, right? He sees that as this kind of uncovering, this unveiling, right? It's this how do we do that? And then he ran with it and took it to, we just have to understand our Dasein, or we have to understand our existence. What does it mean to be us? Done in a different way, of course, but in terms of how he described it from Nietzsche. But I think there's a lot there.
Yeah, I wonder what Nietzsche would have made of being in time.
Well, I'm sure he would have been critical. Okay, let me get to the 125th aphorism. So this is on the other perspective on the madman.
This is the more famous.
Yeah.
One. Der tolle Mensch.
Yeah.
Madman.
So here it goes. It says, "Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace and cried incessantly, 'I seek God, I seek God.' As many of those who did not believe in God were standing around just then, he provoked much laughter. 'Has he got lost?' asked one. 'Did he lose his way like a child?' asked another. 'Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage, immigrated?' Thus they yelled and laughed. The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. 'Whither is God?' he cried. 'I will tell you. We have killed him. You and I, all of us are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually, backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is it not night continually closing in on us? Do we not need to light lanterns in the morning? Do we hear nothing as yet of the noise of the gravediggers who are burying God? Do we smell nothing as yet of the divine decomposition? Gods, too, decompose. God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives? Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement? What sacred games shall we have to inherit? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed, and whoever is born after us for the sake of this deed, he will belong to a higher history than all history hitherto." Here the madman fell silent and looked again at his listeners, and they too were silent and stared at him in astonishment. At last he threw his lantern on the ground and it broke into pieces and went out. "I've come too early," he said. "Then my time is not yet. This tremendous event is still on its way, still wandering. It has not yet reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time. The light of the stars requires time. Deeds, though done, still require time to be seen and heard. This deed is still more distant from them than the most distant stars, and yet they have done it themselves. It has been related further that on the same day, the madman forced his way into several churches and there struck up his requiem aeternam Deo, led out and called to account. He is said always to have replied nothing but, what after all are these churches now, if they are not the tombs and sepulchres of God? This is such a powerful...
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so powerful. It's so powerful. But like, reading it...
And there's a lot going on.
Yeah. It can't help. I mean, Nietzsche, in some ways, people take a lot from Nietzsche, but I think one of the things I've realized more recently is that he was terribly political. And yes. And I can't help but think that some of this is cultural, right? Some of this is this, we've killed God, we've done all these things. It's kind of like about society, about human society. And to an extent, our culture. And I always get like this kind of, this feeling, I don't know, it's just such a ominous feeling when he's like, my time hasn't come yet. I came too early. There's always this like foreboding kind of thing. I don't know. Every time I read it, I was like, oh man, like that's so cryptic. I mean, intentionally, I think, of course, but.
Well, he likes this. He comes back to this in the first aphorism of book 5. This idea that the event is still too distant for most people to have even realized what has happened. So, but at the same time, in the Madman, one thing that's interesting is that the people in the marketplace don't believe in God already.
Right.
Yeah. So it just seems like a joke to them at first. I think he goes with a lantern during the day. I think it's Nietzsche. I think the idea, it comes from a story about Diogenes the cynic, who goes with a lantern to the marketplace at day. But Diogenes is looking for a man. He can't find one. But that said, I mean, it may be significant that it is the marketplace to which he goes. And then these people, they're already enlightened, or they're already sort of post God. They don't believe already. But the madman seems to be he's functioning on another plane. He's deeply disturbed by what he thinks has happened.
Do you think it has anything to do maybe with an idea of morals and values in and of themselves?
Well, I do think it has to do with values because, again, I think Nietzsche's understanding seems to be that like this idea was so central to a whole culture, or to to many cultures that were tied together through Christianity, right? Through the belief in the Christian God ultimately, and that was, in some way, this was the organizing principle of the whole culture or civilization, even. And that it's on its way out. And so what are we doing? We no longer have any way. He says, like, there are all these metaphors of like, it's of disorientation. Like, we don't know where we are. We don't know if we're going up or down.
Yeah, that goes back when I was reading that. It does make me think about like this unifying system, the structure of how we understand the world, how we understand life and death. And if God's dead, then we don't have any of those ideas. Everything is not there. It's interesting though. I never really caught that like they already were kind of post God, if you will. They're laughing at him,
right?
And he's still saying he's too early. I mean, what's that about? That's what's so puzzling.
Yeah. They already don't believe in God, and yet he's too early. Well, because I mean, what isn't the idea something like they don't really appreciate the significance of the event, even though they are already post God. They don't recognize what they've lost with in losing that belief.
Yeah,
they're just sort of casual atheists.
Yeah. It's so interesting because he mentions it again, or it's referenced in Zarathustra as well. You know, and I think at the beginning where, you know, he talks about Zarathustra's going under, you know, he wants to become human again because he already has transcended humanity. And, you know, comes in and says, you know, have you not heard, you know, God's dead, after he comes down. And then at that point, he's saying, I'm going to teach you the overman. I'm going to teach you what it means to do all this. And, you know, he goes on, you know, I always love the three transformations. I think they're always fantastic.
Right.
And
yeah, but there's always this strange sort of, so you're talking about the camel, the lion, and the child.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. The three metamorphoses.
Yeah. And I just wonder, he's tying all these things together. So the gay science was written right before Zarathustra. And then kind of around the time the will to power, he writes the whole Antichrist pamphlet. And I just think that that's why I said in the beginning, I think for Nietzsche, and he's just pulling at this in different ways. This phrase is, or this idea, it works on a lot of different planes. There's like the actuality of it, of like from a Christian God. Yes, we just, yeah. People are still going to keep believing, but I think he was trying to think of this like kind of pure way of believing in it, or this kind of very authentic way, or something like that. And we just have the shadow of God now. I think in a structural, cultural, political way, we don't have any of those unifying structures anymore. I think in terms of values and morals, with his revaluation of values and the eternal recurrence, I think it's also his condemning of that as well. I just feel like this whole thing and what he wanted to do of how could we have a truly human society, like this stuff got in the way and we can't even get forward. We can't progress because we have this shadow that keeps hovering.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And I just think it's on different planes. What he's using this in like 4 or 5 different ways. Yeah.
Well, I think part of it is that, and I mean, this comes out a bit in Ecce Homo as well. It's just this idea that these shadows of God, so to speak, they blind us to our true situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Nietzsche, there's a sense in which Nietzsche is like, you know, wake up. You're on a rock. You know, you're on this little rock out in the middle of the boonies of the cosmos. And it's, you know, like, what are you doing? Like, get real about your situation. Mm-hmm. And I could sort of take this and, you know, I mean, for me, like, I take it and like, I mean, Nietzsche's always say, oh, stay faithful to the earth. That's one of Zarathustra's refrains. Yeah, I tell you to stay faithful, stay true to the earth. And so I think, you know, he sees that we need to see our situation clearly if there's to be any hope for a future that's worth having. And we need to stop thinking in terms of these, you know, it's all going to work out in the end. You know, God's there to guarantee the happy ending.
Yeah.
Or, you know, it doesn't matter what happens to this earth because we're going to go be with God. And this earth is just a veil of tears anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, you know, there's a sense in which, like, he's worried about these shadows of God because he thinks that they keep us from appreciating.
Well, take the visual here. Yeah, take the visual here, right? What's a shadow is something that's not real. It's an imitation, right? It's not actually.
It's a real shadow, but yeah,
it's a real shadow, but it's not the real person, right? It's coming from the real person, but it's not the real thing, right? And I wonder if he's thinking of it that way. That we have this way of living that's not real. I wonder if there's a metaphysical piece here too. I might be inferring here, but we're tricking ourselves. We're duping ourselves. The shadow is what prevents us from becoming the overman.
Yeah.
In a very real sense, right? In terms of our values and our morals. Like, what did he say about values, right? What did he say about morals? We don't really care about morals. What we care about is what's behind them. What is the intentions inside the human heart? That's what we always care about. And how can we know that? And his view, which is, you know, the herd instinct and all of this stuff, is we're letting those things distract us from getting out our true intentions. We're getting out our instincts, getting out the things about what it is to be human. Because that's all we have. That's all we know. That's all we can know. And all of those things about being human are all of the things of life, you know, devoid of any value judgments. And so I wonder if it almost seems like this, you know, structure of sorts with God or religion or culture or values, all of these things prevents us from being more than human, prevents us from using a human mindset to create standards for ourselves and then, you know, but with other people, you know, in a way that is, you know, our kind of, it's like a human sacred kind of thing as opposed to, you know, a divine sacred. And I feel like he just gets that gets in the way.
I mean, I think, you know, he recognizes it, the death of God, as in some sense catastrophic.
Right.
Certainly a crisis.
Yeah.
And then the question is, I mean, one way to read Zarathustra is that the whole book is a search, is seeking. What's it seeking? It's seeking how to live in a world without God.
Yes.
You know, or it's seeking, I think Gooding Williams in his book talks about, it's seeking to create new values, not just to revalue the values we have.
That's right. Yes.
It's seeking, like, can we create new values?
That's right. I mean, I always see it as like a kind of fifth gospel of sorts. That's how it's kind of written.
But you read Zarathustra and it's like, it's such a weird,
it's strange,
like torturous kind of, and I guess tortuous kind of search, you know, and you know there are all these dead ends and
I think that
moments and.
Yeah, I think he's trying to, again, like he's trying to write like a kind of
weirdness. Yeah.
a fifth gospel, using narrative, using parables, he's trying to do it in that kind of form. I feel like that's what it feels like to me.
Well, because I mean, he definitely sort of parodies the Bible, and I guess probably like, you know, so like he's even using like certain phrases from like Luther's translation of the Bible.
But why is this? It feels like a lot of his philosophy. He has so many ideas, right? Eternal recurrence of the same, the overman, you know, the herd, you know, beyond good and evil, human all too human. He has all of these very interesting philosophical ideas, but it just seems like this is the apex for him, right? This is the thing.
Zarathustra.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of gets all kind of spelled out in Zarathustra, or he's trying to do that. But this whole idea, he's introducing the concept of God is dead. You know, we killed him. We're the murderers. You know, how do we deal with this? It's too early for this event. And then he kind of explains out. I mean,
but even at the end, he sort of has to, right? Like, it ends with a certain, like, looking to the future. You know, that, like, my children are coming. They never arrive in the text. He says, like, well, they're coming. It's that weird thing where he's, like, petting the lion and all that.
Yeah, it's so strange.
The birds are, like, flying around his head.
Yeah, it's very strange.
Yeah, so I think it's still in the future. And, you know, I mean, he approached this, the sort of question of like, well, what should we do now in different ways? I mean, you mentioned he has a politics.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that interests me most about his politics is that, I mean, he's an early advocate for a unified Europe.
Mm-hmm.
He has this concept of the good European,
Mm-hmm.
and he's tired of this nationalism stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He thinks, Europe wants to become one. It should become one, and it's going to be great because these different European, there's so much cultural diversity in Europe, and so like it's going to be a great event of learning. Like everyone's going to be learning so much from everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we can extend that vision of the good European to something like a good Earthling.
Yeah.
We need to get beyond this dumb nationalism stuff, and we need to realize that we're all sort of on this rock in the middle of nowhere together.
Yeah, I think that there's this idea. You say Earthling, I would say probably just human.
Yeah.
How do we just see ourselves as humans?
There is a lot of that. Already there are so many. How do you say like intercultural?
Yeah.
There's so much intercultural learning going on already.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're really living in this period where, in the so-called West, we're starting to learn about, for example, more and more about the philosophies of the East,
right,
and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And the literatures of other countries and the music and so on and so forth. So it's really, in a way, it's a great time to be alive. It's exciting,
Well, yeah, because
so
everything's
much to learn,
connected, which is a great thing, I think. Yeah, it is.
European philosophers weren't really talking about philosophy outside of that tradition. Schopenhauer and Hegel are two of the first to really engage with non-Western philosophy.
Yeah,
and maybe a few others before them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that that's super important because you'll start to see a lot of overlap in some ideas, which is, I think, important. I think it's super important.
But another thing we should maybe consider though is that there's some downside to having something in this position of ultimate criterion or ultimate point of reference. People did a lot of bad things in the name of God.
Oh yeah,
and a lot of stupid things. Cruel things.
Still do.
Yeah, and but of course, you could say, well, if you think of capital as something that is now in that position, we're doing a lot of stupid things for the sake of capital.
Oh, absolutely.
Economic growth at all costs. Well,
I think as if you see it as central to, or as a replacement of sorts, that's what becomes problematic about it, right? If it's just an economic wheel, whatever, but it's not that anymore. It hasn't been that for a long time. It becomes the be all end all of it. People almost worship this stuff. And
again, it seems to sort of occlude our vision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's.
The idea of infinite growth on a finite planet just doesn't really work too well.
And there's something just empty about it. There's something.
Well,
I don't know.
I guess like a good capitalist is going to say, look, growth means nicer houses and nicer things for people, and people raising people's standard of living and so on and so forth.
Sort of. I don't know. I don't think people's standard of living is great in many places, even in capitalist societies. It really becomes about money. It becomes about work. That's all it is. And in fact, people that don't have a lot of capital in certain parts of the world are actually really happy.
Yeah.
You know,
I had the good fortune to live in a relatively poor country for only about a month in high school. I think maybe we've talked about this before.
Where'd you live?
In Dominican Republic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, the people were very poor compared to America. They were much happier.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the thing. You say, look, not only are we destroying the planet, but how are we living our lives, working ourselves to death at these often inane jobs.
Yeah.
So that we can, it starts to sound like Fight Club, so that we can buy khakis or whatever.
Right. I mean, and many unhappy people are some of the most famous and wealthiest. It just doesn't connect. There's no depth to it.
Yeah.
I think it's fine if it's giving you a quality of life or it's helping you to live in a good way, but a hyper focus or an over focus on that game of it, I just don't think people are really genuinely happy.
Yeah.
And so, I think it is, problematic in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, I guess we get our 10 minutes of mindfulness.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say on the death of God?
No, I mean, just it's definitely something I'm gonna keep thinking about.
Yeah, it's
this idea of like writing. My students are always like, you should write a little Nietzsche book.
Yeah, it'd be great. I mean,
I feel like it's a good angle, or like a good way to sort of get into some of the other topics and other things that are going on in the gay science. Zarathustra, I agree with you. It's just like it's incomparable. But I always love the gay science. It's really my favorite.
Yeah, it's my favorite too. It's my favorite Nietzsche book. It always has been. I like Beyond Good and Evil. It's a good kind of primer. I think Daybreak, or however it's translated in certain English translations, is great. All Too Human's great. But the gay science is my favorite.
Most of them are pretty good. I'm a big Ecce Homo fan.
Yeah. This is very, very interesting piece as well. So let's talk about. I know you had mentioned this at some point to me. This idea of appreciation is interesting to me. You had mentioned this a little while back, and I guess what do you think is kind of the role of how do we take stock in things, or how do we appreciate things when we do them, and why do we do that? Why do we need to do that? We create art, or we do something and we say, we want to just show appreciation for it. What do you make of this?
What is that? I mean, I'm interested in this idea of like, what does it mean to have an appreciation for something, or to appreciate something? And I don't, I think appreciation is maybe like, it's a bit underappreciated. It itself is underappreciated, I think, as a concept. It has this, of course, the word has this sense too of like gratitude, right? Like you say, I appreciate something. I appreciate that you did that. It means I'm grateful or something. I value it. So, I mean, in a way, I guess with appreciation, we're in the domain of, because we say like, okay, and the other thing is we want to teach people art appreciation, or music appreciation, appreciation for philosophy, or so on and so forth. So I guess it's about valuing something, but it's a kind of way of valuing, right? Like to have an appreciation for music doesn't necessarily mean that you're a connoisseur or an expert, or so it's, or a devotee, or.
Well, it's interesting, right? it's something that there's a lot of things that are they're kind of like connected to it. So let me give an example. So I can look at a piece of art, whether it's painting or sculpture or music, and I can appreciate it, but I don't value it. Or I can appreciate it, but I don't like it.
Yeah, like when you say like I appreciate what they were trying to do there.
Yeah, so then it becomes, and there's probably dimensions to this, right? Which is, okay, I'll give a great example, and I do think there's something about this in terms of as we get older and as we mature, and some of our temperament and things like that too. So, for the longest time, I didn't like the Beatles.
Yeah,
didn't get it. I was like, it's not my style. I don't know if it's very talented. It's just a lot of chords. It's a lot of like, I don't know. Just a lot of like, I don't know, 1950s like doo-wop shit. And it was just kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, like, I mean, how long did it really take to write, she loves you, yeah. I mean, I didn't get it. I was just like,
their music evolves, though.
It's like, all right. I mean, sure. Was that a big thing from like Frank Sinatra and stuff? Absolutely. But I mean, objectively, is that really good? And so I didn't appreciate it. I was just like, Beatles are overrated, whatever. I felt it was like one of those things that like you had to like listen to it. Or excuse me, that you had to like it was like a thing that everyone liked, and you kind of like have to like it. And that's kind of like Radiohead. It's like everyone likes Radiohead, and it's like a thing to be. This is a thing to do to like Radiohead or the Beatles. Or
Radiohead's really good though.
Right. So here's my thing, right? So these things will bother me. This stuff will really bother me, right? Yeah. If there's something that's captured by culture and has a timeless element to it, why can't I see it? And it will bother me. And then the thing will become, I don't have to like it, I don't have to value it, but why can't I at least appreciate it like all these other people do? What are they seeing I'm not seeing? God damn it. Like, what is it? So I remember I talked to a few people, I can't remember who, big Beatles, fans. They just, standing for the Beatles. They just love the Beatles. Sure. And I said, like, and I asked older people that were teenagers during this time, and I asked younger people and all these things. I said, what is it? Explain to me. What? Don't tell me like, oh, they're amazing. Like, yeah, I get that. What is it? What am I not seeing? And I gave some of my arguments. And so there's a meta piece to this. I'll come back to it in a minute. Somebody says, they didn't write a song more or less in 10 years, but 11 years, whatever, how long they were banned, that wasn't a hit. Like, more or less, they wrote hits. I was like, okay, big deal. And they know how to write. They're like, no, you don't understand. Think about that. It's like, okay. Yes, their music is very simple, maybe musically of sorts. Mm-hmm. I don't play guitar, but could I get a guitar and learn a Beatles song in a couple hours? Probably, right? That's not the point. I said, okay. It's like, so on one layer, think about how hard it is for four guys, and granted, they had all these personalities and stuff, but to make music that hadn't existed, at least in that way, and they're using all their influences and all these things, and make consecutively for a decade, hit after hit after hit after hit after hit that was catchy, simple, short, and accessible for people.
Yeah.
That evoked emotion in people.
Yeah.
And then as they got older, as they progressed over time, they made different types of music. So it wasn't just a kind of like doo-wop kind of thing. It was also like, when you look at Yellow Submarine and Sgt. Pepper's, their sound evolved into, into this kind of mysticism, kind of late 60s, whatever. And then I was like, okay, I could see it. I was starting to get it, a little bit. And I said, okay, I never thought of that. That's true. And then they said, think of another band or an artist currently that writes songs that are hits for 10 years and they all sound a little different and everyone loves it. It's very hard to think of that person.
Yeah, I can't think of anyone.
It's very difficult. Okay. Then the other layer of it was, what are they doing within their song structure? So this took me a bit. It's okay. Well, I don't know. It's just kind of chords and strumming along and doing some like vocal harmonies. It's like, no, they're doing a lot of other ideas within this very 2.5, 3 minute structure. Mm-hmm. So they're putting a lot of these ideas, right? Might be a little run here, a little run there, a little off time beat here, different vocal kinds of things that are matching or not matching. Mm-hmm. But it's so good, you don't notice it. And that's what makes it good, is that you're not seeing that and like, oh yeah, wow. It's so easy. And it's like, think about how hard it is to write that. Mm-hmm. And then at that moment, that's where it all clicked for me. All of those things together, I went from like, they're overrated, I don't get it, to I appreciate them, I don't know if I really like it. And I could appreciate the talent. Mm-hmm. And then it became, and I can appreciate their influence and stuff, but I was like, okay. And then it became, oh, wow, like I really get it. And then I listened to it differently. It's still not my favorite type of music, but I can definitely listen to the Beatles and be kind of like blown away every time I listen to it. So I say that because everybody, now this is what's interesting, and this is what I don't know. So sometimes you can appreciate something and don't value it. Sometimes you can appreciate something and don't like it. And you can learn to appreciate something you previously did not appreciate. And in that way, what is it that is calibrated for each person here? So for me, a lot of people say, well, they got to listen to music that gives them a feeling. Less so for me. For me, it's very intellectual. It's very cognitive in some ways. I do like the feeling piece too, but it's very, I need to be kind of impressed. I need it to be different. You need to be doing something different. And I need to be impressed by it. It doesn't mean that you play all the notes in one song, not necessarily technically, although that stuff's cool too. But it's something that has to be in whatever it is, in whatever world it's in. I need to see the skill. I want to see the talent. I want to see what you're offering. I want to see what you're creating. That's what I'm appreciating. Now, this is an example with art. I mean, this is kind of doesn't work as well with other concepts, but it's an example. So, anyways, what do you think? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I like your example because you say like, well, I still don't love it. It's not my favorite, but now I appreciate it, or I have an appreciation.
Oh, big time. Oh yeah,
but there seems to be something. Appreciation is sort of mild in this way. It's not. I mean, it's not the same thing as saying like, oh, I love the Beatles.
I definitely like the Beatles. I enjoy the Beatles. I don't love it.
Yeah, but there could even be something that, and you said before, like you don't really like it, but you appreciate it somehow.
Well, I wonder if that's because now some of that could be just like style or temperament. So with Radiohead, it's too depressing for me. It's too melancholy. It's a little self-loathing. I mean, it's Tom York. That's his whole thing. But like, I get it. Like, I get why it's amazing. Like, and I appreciate it, and I totally respect it. They're supremely talented. It's just, for me personally, I just can't. Like, I don't put that on a regular basis. Like, I have to be in a mood, because it is a mood, right? I have to, like, and there's other people like that as well, where I'm just like, and that's fine. Like, that, not, there are some bands, not every band needs to just kind of meet all of your moods, but so I think that's just kind of like a preference or an affinity thing.
Yeah.
So I think it depends on that. Again, it was the same thing with Jackson Pollock. I mean, I thought that was fucking garbage for the longest time.
Yeah.
And I had to have my wife and my brother, who are both designers. They both went to, they have a BFA and went to school, did art history, the whole thing. I had to have them sit down with me and hear them yell at me of how I'm an idiot because I don't understand Jackson Pollock and why he's a genius. Yep. And just for my like Philistine brain on this, I was just like, look, there's nothing. And the thing I kept coming to, so this kind of does go to what you're saying, I guess, about the value, is for me, somebody just letting something do like just like random like paint droppings in a certain fashion isn't thoughtful. That's just random in my mind. That's how I saw it. And many things were told to me, but one of them was, but you didn't think to do it.
Yeah.
And you didn't think to do it that way. And to do it in different ways, and how is capturing a moment.
Yeah, I had that conversation with someone once. They're like, well, I could do that. I said, but you didn't.
Right. Right. And it's not that you only did it, it's that you didn't do it in that way. And you didn't do it in that way where you didn't repeat yourself. And then also what it was doing in, art in many ways is the anti of the thing before it. Right. Right.
Well,
and so,
sorry.
No, that's what's, I get it. And then I got it. And then I was like, oh, okay. Like, and it pushes me and it challenges me. Right. But it does. So, but here's the thing, right? So, I mean, I can go on with this stuff, but like, it's one of those things where I put as a value talent and mastery of whatever skill you're in, and showing that and being disciplined. All of my appreciation, the appreciation is in the front, but what's behind the appreciation is those values I have. And that's going to be very different for other people.
Yeah.
Some people, they're going to put feelings or how they have a feeling, how a painting makes them feel, or they have an appreciation for their process, or they have an appreciation for, whatever their experience was and getting it out at that point with their song or film or, whatever. And that's different. But I guess the real question here is, what's animating appreciation for different people?
Well, the way you talk about it, I mean, it makes me think that, in order to appreciate anything, you have to give it a chance in one way or another.
What do you mean?
Well, I don't know. I mean, like with Jackson Pollock or with the Beatles or whatever, you have to be open to. I mean, in your case, it seems to be like there have to be some arguments, there have to be some speeches.
I need to understand why this is revered. So I need an explanation. Yes, I definitely need. You need to sell it. You need to explain it to me. Why is Nietzsche so amazing? Well, I can give you an explanation for it. You might not like it, but I'm going to give you one.
Yes.
So I guess that's what it is. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, and it seems when we're talking about appreciation too, like something. We're also talking about maybe understanding in a way.
Go on.
I appreciate. Radiohead's not my favorite thing, but I have an appreciation for it. Mm-hmm. In a way, what we're saying is like it's not just that I value it, but that I sort of have some understanding of what it is or what they're trying to do.
Yeah. I think understanding is there. There's an openness and there's a potential for understanding. Yeah.
And some kind of value.
Yes. Yeah. So that would. So what is that? That's some openness. What was the other thing I said?
Understanding.
Understanding. Yeah, you said that. Yeah, understanding. Yeah.
And it seems to be, the way we're talking about it, at least, it seems to be something that we can contrast with, like, really liking something or loving it.
Right. Yeah. These things aren't connected necessarily.
It's one thing for me to say, like, I appreciate abstract expressionism. It's another thing for me to say I love abstract expressionism.
So, okay. Interesting. So the thing I'm thinking about at the moment is, if we like something or we love something, is appreciation subsumed under it?
Well, like, I love something, and so therefore I appreciate it as well.
Right. Or could you have those separate? And my initial reaction is, I can like or love something and not think about that I appreciate it, but I probably do.
Yeah. But it doesn't go the other way.
But it doesn't go the other way. Right.
Yeah. You can appreciate something without loving it.
Right. So, like,
yeah, that's nice.
I really love the work by Marc Chagall.
Mm-hmm.
I love the work of Rothko. These are things where I'm not thinking about my appreciation for it. I'm thinking about my feeling about it, my experience of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering this, that if it's right there. If I love something or I like something, I don't need appreciation for it, but it might be connected. If I don't like or love something, I might need appreciation to then potentially liking it.
And then, of course, you could just not like it or appreciate it. It's just bad.
Right. I could be indifferent.
Yeah, you could be indifferent, or you could be, like, actively hostile to something.
Right.
Really disliking it.
But then, okay, so think about it in the negative. Do I am I actively working about something if I dislike it? And I think that that's interesting, because that can be either or. So I could have reasons for disliking something. I don't think it's talented. I don't think that it has skill. I don't think that it's... But I could also just not like something. And I can't explain why I don't like it. It's just a feeling I get. And also a third view is there are certain things that I can feel both. And that actually happens a lot.
Ambivalence.
No. Well, yes, I did that, so maybe 4, but, like, for example, it's another example. I, for the most part, dislike Game of Thrones, but I have reasons for why I dislike it. Many reasons. But I also find other aspects of it that I do enjoy.
Yeah, it goes downhill pretty hard after the first 3 seasons.
Yes, but there are things. Yes, it does. But I feel like for a lot of things, it's not a dichotomous like or dislike, appreciate or not appreciate. It's usually it becomes siphoned into these, like, I appreciate this and I don't appreciate this part, or I like this and I don't like this. And so it becomes very complicated, right? And I think some people do this without knowing that. But I guess I guess back to the original point here is, why do we want people to appreciate things?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. Because one of the things I was thinking about again were sort of these classes that they used to do at when I was in like elementary school, like first grade, and they would do like parents would come in and do like art appreciation,
Yeah.
music appreciation.
Yeah.
So, I mean, part of it is you're just exposing people to something.
Mm-hmm.
You can't appreciate something without having some exposure to it in the first place. But then, of course, it's not just about exposure, but it's about sort of framing that exposure in a certain way. And and you say like, well, why is it important? Well, we think that, and I think we think rightly that having, people having an appreciation for painting or people having an appreciation for music will enrich their lives, right? Or, we could talk about having an appreciation for philosophy. Like maybe someone takes 3 philosophy courses during their undergraduate career. They're not a major, they're not even a minor, but hopefully they gain some appreciation for the thing, the activity.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a conversation recently with Robin Hanson, who's a very interesting thinker, very novel thinker. He's an economist, but he has backgrounds in physics and a bunch of other things. And he talked about this idea, which has been just gnawing at me since we talked about it, about this idea of the sacred. And I kept thinking about why, he told me the idea of the sacred. And then he told me, I asked him, like, why are you thinking about this? And I thought it was going to be some romanticized. I'm getting older, my grandkids. And he was like, no, every time I pitch an idea, everyone shoots it down. And so it's always because of the sacred, right? People just don't want to do anything different than what they hold sacred. That could be education. That could be healthcare. That could be our institutions. That could be we hold things sacred.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. At least the way he organized or conceptualized it really stuck with me. And his point was, we all have something we see sacred. There's no way we don't. And I think that's true. Whether we know it or not, whether we accept it or not, we do. I think that's true. And some of it is because of our, certain norms we have as a society. But on an individual level, I think it's something, there's a lot of things that are kind of pushing that. And so, obviously, this comes up with this idea of appreciation, or how do we appreciate, things, whether they're accomplishments or whether they're some type of solidarity and some type of unity. But we're placing emphasis on things that we deem important to us, or some things that we consider sacred. And by choosing one, we're not choosing the other or other things. So it's always a sacrifice we're making, inherent.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder with this idea of appreciating accomplishments or appreciating art or appreciating talent or appreciating these things, people are going to do that regardless. But how do we expand that horizon for people to appreciate things, especially if they don't know it or see it? So, in my case with the Beatles, for me, part of it was I didn't get a good explanation. And now there's a version of me.
Ultimately, eventually you did.
Yeah, but there's a version of me when I was very young where I always liked proving people wrong. And I realized that was very much a dead end very quickly. And then I saw that it was very empty. And I said, well, that's not important anymore. But I guess some of where that evolved for me was trying to understand and then seeing the kind of the gray of things and seeing that perspective, and then then it becomes very difficult to find right and wrongs of sorts, right? And I just kind of almost try to surpass that kind of thing. But it does take some, it's an overused term, so I don't want to use it, but it does take some curiosity. I really think so. It really takes curiosity, and it goes back to intentions. I think it really does go back to what or our values, and why that is, and why people have values, and why people will passionately believe those things, or why they'll be exploring those things. And I don't know. I think all of those things are there. And so back to the question, why should we appreciate things? Or why should we appreciate accomplishments? Well, I guess the other question would be, what happens if you don't?
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as I think of that, it absolutely depresses me.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess what I think hard about that is, why? And to me, it would be, I think more often than not, maybe because we're social creatures, but we don't just create things. We create things to be seen. We create things to be used. We create things to be read. We create things for something or for someone.
Mm-hmm.
We never just create. Then it would say, well, why do it at all? Well, it could be just for you. But what's the first thing people do as soon as they create something? They post it on Instagram. They, share it with their friends. Look at this thing I got. Let me show you this. Look what I created. Why would we create it otherwise? Now, it could have a variety of reasons. If I draw a picture, or if I paint a picture, it could be for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I want people to share in that and then get their own things out of it. So it is always, I don't think it's ever just in isolation. Creation always needs an audience. And so if you're, maybe not, but if you're in that case, and if you don't, what happens if you don't appreciate something? I don't know. Does it take some type of meaning out of it? I don't know. Does it take some kind of, I don't know. It's almost like a dependent feature, maybe. I don't know. I when I think about it in the negative, it makes me feel terrible. Imagine a kid that makes a bunch of drawings and they create it, and then they show their parents, but they never see it. Mm-hmm. It's like, and again, that goes back to creating or having accomplishment or doing something is something a part of humanity. And it's something we're getting out. And there's some truth in it that wasn't once known. It's the uncovering. So then you want to know that.
Well, I
don't know.
Guess we want other people to appreciate what we've made or done. But in a way, we come back to maybe even the connection with appreciation and gratitude.
Right.
In a way, we hope others will be grateful for what we've added to the world.
Okay, but why? Why wouldn't we just do it for ourselves? If I write something, right? If I write a piece or something, the first thing I do is now for me, I have different reasons for why I want it. That's different. I just want somebody to read it.
Yeah.
I don't ever write something for just me.
I keep a journal for almost 20 years now, and no one sees it.
Sure. There are certain things like that. Yes, I think there's exceptions here. But I think, okay, let me put it this way. If something is meant or designed for public viewership, you want people to see it. You want them to interact with it.
Yeah, and you hope they'll appreciate it.
Yes. Even if they don't agree with it.
Even if they don't agree with it, or
if they don't like it.
Maybe if they don't even like it.
Right.
They can still appreciate it. Or they could still there's this phrase we use, which is nice. Like, I appreciate what they were trying to do. Or maybe you just
right, which doesn't always sound great.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you might not say it to them, but you might say it with your friend who's with you or something. You say, like, I appreciate what they were trying to do here. And maybe, I don't know, I mean, are you just saying then, like, I understand what they were trying to do, or by saying that I appreciate what they were trying to do, is there some...
That's what it is. That's what it is. That's what it is. Appreciation.
Because in a way, I'm saying something more, I think, than just saying I understand what they're trying to do. So when I say I appreciate what they're trying to do, in a way, I'm also saying that, like, yes, I understand, but also I sort of respect it in a way.
It could be the respect, but I think what I'm seeing, what I'm like, what's coming to me is, I see you as a human. I see what your human experience is like internally, and I can appreciate that. It's like it's an understanding, it's an acknowledgement. Maybe it is somewhat of a little bit of a respect thing. That's what it is, I think. Like something like it's a shorthand for just explaining that, like, look, someone sat down, they took a lot of hours, they took a lot of time to make this or create this, and they had thoughts and feelings about it. There's a whole story I can create in my head about how someone did this, and then when they did it, I don't like it, I hate it, I think it sucks, whatever, but I appreciate what they put into it. I appreciate the energy, the time, and it's seeing another person. Like it's acknowledging that you see them, like there's a part of them in that and what they created, and you're recognizing and seeing that.
So it's a way of valuing something, but it's a very sort of subtle way of valuing. And it's not, because, in other words, it's not outright, this is great. Or, oh, and you know what else people say, which is nice, is like I have some appreciation for that.
Right. This part of it. I don't like all of this, but I appreciate this part of it. Yeah. I've heard. Yeah, I've definitely heard that.
Like, I have some appreciation for country music.
Right. I have no appreciation. Nah, that's not true. See, that's not true. See, right. I despise country music, but I can appreciate its talent.
Yeah.
And so, okay. So is the appreciation only on what I value, or what is inherent in the thing itself? So, for example, country music's a great example. I despise country music. I don't like it. I don't like the twanginess of it. I don't like the narrative. I don't like the lyrics. I just don't like it. Yeah. I don't like the song structure. I find it repulsive. But I can respect, or I can appreciate, some of the talent that it has musically. That's because my supreme value is talent, is dedication, is, I place those on a high value for me.
Yeah.
But that's not specific. See, that's the thing. It's not specific to country music. It's just in it for that one thing. But I would respect that in any other thing. So it's really more about my values.
Yeah, but it's also about it being in it. So I think, I don't know. I think you just answered your own question, because
no, but it's not unique to it.
It's not unique to it, but it is in it.
Right. But if that wasn't my value, then I probably wouldn't appreciate it then.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you might have totally different values, and
so that's to your point.
You might have values that you might have values that would make you like country music even more.
Yeah, I mean, look, and there's obviously
it's very wholesome. I was driving back from DC, and I don't know why. Like, sometimes I just listen to the radio in the car. Like, I like to. I got on some kind of. It's very wholesome, my hometown, and
It can be.
I don't love you like I used to. I love you even more and stuff like that. So there's some of it's very wholesome,
Yeah. It's interesting. It's again, more things for me to consider as well. Well, we've been at it for a long time, David, and it's always fun. It's always fun. I enjoy
it. Great to see you again, even if only through the medium of the.
Well, that's right. Only through technology. Any places that people can find you, or anything they can find anything you're working on?
No, I'm online. I'm been writing about Camus and guilt, Albert Camus and guilt, in his novel The Fall. And I got some book review coming out with Cleveland Review of Books in a couple months of the new Malcolm Harris book, Palo Alto, which
nice.
I'm really enjoying. And working on the Nietzsche book. Maybe gonna try and work on a little Nietzsche book here. So
no, that's great.
I was threatening to do that on Twitter, and so
that's good. Yeah. All right, David. Well, thank you so much. It's always fun talking to you. All righty.
Thank you.